They say the hearing is the last sense to go before you die. I used to think that was poetic, a final mercy allowing you to hear the prayers of your loved ones guiding you into the dark. I was wrong. It isn't a mercy, it is a curse. When you are lying in a hospital bed, paralyzed with a ventilator breathing for you, and your eyes taped shut to prevent the corneas from drying out, hearing is the only way you can witness your own dismantling. I didn't hear prayers. I heard the distinct, rhythmic tapping of a stylus on a tablet screen, followed by the sound of a champagne cork popping, softly, discreetly, but unmistakably. Is he stable? A male voice. Deep, familiar. It sounded like Marcus, my chief operating officer, the man I had best man duties for 3 years ago. Stable is a relative term, a woman's voice replied. Elena, my wife. Her voice didn't carry the tremulous vibrato of a grieving spouse. It was flat, efficient, the tone she used when negotiating with contractors for the summer house in the Hamptons. The doctor said the Guillain-Barré variant is aggressive. He's locked in. He's here, Marcus, but he's not here. So he can't feel anything. He can't move. It's just biological maintenance at this point. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the tubes from my throat and roar that I was still the CEO of Advanced Dynamics, that I was 38 years old, and that I could feel the cold draft of the air conditioner on my exposed ankles. But I couldn't. My brain screamed commands, lift arm, open eyes, twitch a finger. But the signals died somewhere in my spinal cord, swallowed by the darkness of my own nervous system. I was a consciousness trapped in a meat cage. It had happened fast. Too fast. 72 hours ago, I was standing on the terrace of our penthouse in Manhattan, overlooking Central Park. I held a glass of scotch in one hand and my phone in the other, tracking the Asian market. Open. Elena had come up behind me, placing a hand on my shoulder. She had been wearing that silk emerald dress I bought her in Milan. You look tired, Ethan, she had said. Drink your tea. You need to sleep. The tea. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow, though my body remained perfectly still. I had attributed the sudden numbness in my fingertips to exhaustion. The dizziness, I thought, was just stress from the upcoming merger. But then my legs had buckled. I remembered the carpet rushing up to meet my face, the shattered glass, and Elena standing over me. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't lunged for the phone immediately. She had just watched, her face unreadable, observing me like a specimen in a jar for a full minute before she finally dialed 911. Now in the sterile quiet of the private ICU room at Mount Sinai, the pieces were beginning to align in the terrifying clarity of the dark. The board is panicking, Elena, Marcus said. I heard the creak of the guest chair. He was sitting close to her. Too close. The stock dipped 12% since the admission news broke. If we don't present a succession plan by Monday, the sharks smell blood. We need his signature on the transfer of authority. We can't get a signature, Marcus. Look at him, Elena replied. There was a rustle of fabric. She must have been standing over me now. I felt the ghost of a touch, her hand brushing the hair off my forehead. To an outsider, it would look like a loving caress. To me, it felt like a butcher inspecting a cut of meat. But we have the medical directive. If he's incapacitated, I have power of attorney. I just need Dr. Aris to certify that the condition is likely permanent. Aris is on board? Aris has a gambling debt that I just made disappear. Aris will say whatever the chart needs to say. The coldness of it froze the blood I couldn't feel circulating. This wasn't just opportunism. This was architecture. They were building a future on the foundation of my corpse. The realization washed over me, replacing the panic with a heavy, leaden dread. My illness, this sudden, violent autoimmune crash, might not have been an accident. The tea, the distinct, bitter aftertaste underneath the chamomile. I wasn't just sick, I was being erased. I don't want to wait until Monday, Marcus murmured. His voice dropped an octave, shifting from professional concern to something intimate, something possessing. I hate seeing him like this. It's pathetic. Ethan Vance, the titan of tech. Look at him now. Don't be cruel, baby, Elena said, but there was a smile in her voice. He provided well for us. He's going to make us very, very powerful. Silence followed. Not the silence of an empty room, but the wet, sickening silence of a kiss. Right there, over my paralyzed body. I could hear the wetness of it, the soft exhales, the absolute disregard for the husband lying 3 feet away fighting too. Take his next mechanical breath. Rage is a powerful fuel. If my body could have responded to the adrenaline flooding my system, the monitors would have been screaming. My heart rate must have spiked, but the beta blockers in my IV drip kept everything artificially calm. I am going to kill you, I thought, projecting the words at Elena with every ounce of my will. I am going to survive this, and I am going to destroy you. The door opened. Heavy footsteps. Mrs. Vance? A new voice, the doctor. Dr. Eris, Elena said, her voice instantly shifting into the heartbroken wife mode. It was a terrifying transformation. Please, tell me there's some change. Tell me he squeezed your hand. I wish I had better news, Elena, Dr. Eris said. His voice was smooth, practiced. The paralysis has reached the respiratory center. We're doing everything we can, but the neurological damage appears profound. You need to prepare yourself. Even if he wakes up, the Ethan you knew, he's gone. Oh God, Elena sobbed. It sounded so real. If I didn't know better, I would have believed her. What do we do? The company, everything he worked for. You need to think about yourself now, Marcus interjected, the supportive friend. Ethan would want the company protected. He would want you protected. I'll sign the papers, Elena whispered through fake tears. Whatever we need to do to save his legacy. Lying there in the dark, unable to blink away the moisture gathering under my taped eyelids, I made a vow. They thought I was a vegetable. They thought I was a tragic headline waiting to be printed. They were wrong. I wasn't the victim. I was the evidence. And the thing about evidence is that it sits quietly, gathering dust, until the moment it is brought into the light to hang the guilty. Let them sign the papers, I thought. Let them think they've won, because the headline of my recovery isn't going to be a fluff piece in the lifestyle section. It's going to be an obituary for their lives. Home is supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where the walls hold memories of safety and comfort. But as the private ambulance crew wheeled my gurney across the marble threshold of our Tribeca penthouse, I realized that home is just a matter of perspective. To a free man, this sprawling apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River was a palace. To me, it was just a more expensive mausoleum than the hospital room. They set up the hospital bed in the center of the master suite. It was a grotesque intrusion of chrome and sterile plastic into a room designed for warmth and intimacy. The hum of the ventilator and the rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor replaced the soft jazz I used to play in the evenings. I was positioned facing the window, a cruel mercy that allowed me to watch the city move while I remained frozen in time. For the first few days, the routine was a blur of nurses and technicians. Elena played the role of the devastated saint to perfection. She hovered by the door, wringing her hands, asking the nurses if I was in pain, if I needed more pillows, if the lighting was too harsh. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award, designed solely for the audience of paid staff who would inevitably gossip to the tabloids. But the real show began on Tuesday morning. I knew it was Tuesday because the cleaning staff came on Tuesdays, and I could smell the distinct lemon polish they used on the mahogany floors. But instead of the cleaners, a procession of suits entered the room. I recognized the first man immediately, Harrison, my general counsel. He had been with Vance Dynamics since the garage days. He looked older, his shoulders slumped under the weight of a heavy briefcase. Behind him was a stranger, a younger lawyer with slicked-back hair and a hungry look in his eyes. And then came Marcus, walking with the proprietary swagger of a man who already owned the place. Can he hear us? Harrison asked, his voice low, respectful. He refused to look directly at me, focusing instead on the monitors as if they were the entity in charge. The doctors say his cognitive functions are severely impaired, Elena said. She was standing at the foot of my bed, wearing a modest black dress that suggested mourning without technically committing to it. He has periods of wakefulness, but there is no comprehension. It's just reflexes. Liar. I was screaming inside my skull. Harrison, look at my eyes. Look at the pupil dilation. Ask me a yes or no question. We need to discuss the interim leadership protocols, Elena, Harrison said, opening his briefcase on the vanity table. The bylaws are clear. In the event of Ethan's incapacitation, the board votes on a temporary CEO until a medical review board. We don't have time for a review board, Harrison, Marcus interrupted. He moved to stand beside Elena, his shoulder brushing hers. The stock is in free fall. The Asian partners are threatening to pull out of the merger. We need a decisive signal to the market today. Ethan was very specific about the chain of command, Harrison insisted, pulling out a thick document. He didn't want the company handed over without checks and balances. Specifically, he wanted a third-party audit before any transfer of power. I mentally cheered. Good old Harrison. Even with me silent, his loyalty was a shield. Elena sighed, a sound of profound, exhausted martyrdom. She walked over to Harrison and placed a hand on his arm. Harrison, I know you want to protect Ethan's wishes, but Ethan didn't plan for this. He didn't plan to be a vegetable at 38. If we wait for an audit, there won't be a company left to protect. Is that what he would have wanted? To see Vance Dynamics bankrupt because of bureaucracy? Mrs. Vance is right, the young lawyer spoke up. I realized then that he wasn't with the firm. He was her hire. We have prepared a durable power of attorney addendum. Given the medical urgency, it grants Mrs. Vance the authority to act as Ethan's proxy in all business matters, effectively bypassing the board vote. That is highly irregular, Harrison snapped. It effectively makes Elena the CEO. It makes her the proxy, Marcus corrected smoothly. I will handle the operations as COO. Elena will simply provide the signature authority that Ethan cannot give. It's a partnership. For Ethan. For me. The audacity of it made my blood boil, a sensation that remained purely metaphorical. Harrison, Elena said softly, her voice trembling. Please, I am losing my husband. Don't make me lose his life's work too. Let me save it for him. If he ever comes back, I want him to have something to come back to. Harrison looked at her, then at Marcus, and finally, reluctantly, at me. He looked into my eyes. I tried to widen them, to signal distress, to do anything that would scream no, but the paralysis was absolute. My eyelids felt like lead shutters. To him, I was just a staring, breathing corpse. I will need to notarize this immediately, Harrison said, defeated, and I want it noted that I advised against this without a full board meeting. Noted, the young lawyer said, uncapping a fountain pen. They placed the document on the bedside table, right next to my paralyzed hand. The irony was suffocating. They were signing away my empire within arm's reach of the man who built it. I watched as Harrison signed as a witness, then Marcus, and finally, Elena. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was louder than the ventilator. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound of my life being stolen. Thank you, Harrison, Elena said, her voice instantly firming up once the ink was dry. You can go now. Marcus and I need to review the press release. Harrison lingered for a moment, looking at me with a mixture of pity and guilt. I'm sorry, Ethan, he whispered. Then he turned and left, taking my last hope of legal defense with him. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The temperature seemed to drop, or perhaps it was just the removal of the warmth of human decency. Elena didn't move away from the table. She picked up the document, reviewing it with a critical eye. Did we get the clause about the liquid assets included? Page 4, paragraph 2, the young lawyer, her lawyer said. Unrestricted access to the personal accounts for medical and lifestyle maintenance. It's bulletproof. Good work. Verify the transfer, Marcus said to the lawyer. Then get out. We have work to do. The lawyer nodded and slipped out. Now it was just the three of us. Elena, Marcus, and the husks of Ethan Vance. Marcus loosened his tie and walked over to the minibar built into the bookshelf. He poured 2 fingers of my rare Japanese whiskey, the bottle I had been, saving for our 10th anniversary. He didn't ask Elena if she wanted one. He just poured 2 glasses. Harrison is going to be a problem, Marcus said, taking a sip and grimacing appreciatively. He asked too many questions. He's old guard, Elena replied. walking over to take the glass from him. She didn't look at me. She leaned back against the heavy desk, crossing her ankles. Once we have the board under control, we'll force him into early retirement. We can frame it as a stress-related departure. Maybe he was too heartbroken over Ethan's condition. Marcus chuckled, a low rumble that vibrated through the room. He walked toward her, stepping directly into my line of sight. He blocked the window, blocked the light. You were incredible today. The grieving widow act? Flawless. I learned from the best, she said, tilting her head back as he approached. Ethan always said presentation is everything. Ethan is yesterday's news, Marcus said. He reached out and ran a hand down her arm, his fingers lingering on her wrist before moving up to her neck. And then, right there, in the sanctity of my bedroom, amidst the smell of antiseptic and my own helplessness, he kissed her. It wasn't the chaste, comforting kiss of a friend. It was hungry, possessive, and practiced. He pulled her against him, and she melted into his frame, one hand tangling in his hair, the other still holding the glass of my whiskey. They were 5 feet away from me. If I could have closed my eyes, I would have, but I was forced to watch. I saw the way her body arched into his. I saw the relief on her face. Not just sexual, but the relief of a conspirator who has finally secured the payload. They broke apart after a long moment, breathless. Marcus looked over Elena's shoulder, directly at me. His eyes were cold, devoid of the friendship that had spanned 15 years. He raised his glass in a mock toast. To the future, he said, staring right into my unblinking eyes. Elena turned to look at me too. Her expression was chillingly blank. She walked over to the bed, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She leaned down, her face inches from mine. I could smell the expensive perfume I had bought her, mixed with the scent of the whiskey on her breath. Don't worry, darling, she whispered, her voice soft enough that the audio monitors wouldn't flag it as distress. We're going to take good care of everything. You just rest. You've worked hard enough. She reached out and adjusted the blanket, pulling it tighter across my chest. It felt like she was tucking me in for a burial. Is the nurse coming back? Marcus asked, checking his watch. Not for an hour. I gave the agency specific instructions, minimal intrusion during family time. Good, Marcus said, placing his glass on my nightstand, right next to the picture of us at our wedding. Let's go to the study. We need to start liquidating the non-performing assets before the quarterly report. Which ones? Start with the charitable foundation, Marcus said. It's bleeding cash. We don't need tax write-offs anymore. We need liquidity. They walked out of the room together, leaving the door slightly ajar. I could hear their footsteps fading down the hallway, their voices merging into a hum of excitement and greed. I was left alone with the rhythm of the ventilator. Hiss, click, exhale. They thought they had signed a victory treaty. They thought the ink on that paper was the end of the story. But as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't physical. My body was still a stone. It was a mental clarity, sharper than anything I had felt in the boardroom. They had made a mistake, a fatal one. By bringing me home, they hadn't put me in storage. They had brought the recording device right into the war room. They were going to discuss everything. The fraud, the liquidation, the affair right in front of me because they believed I was empty. I wasn't empty. I was recording. And for the first time since the collapse, I wasn't just surviving. I was hunting. Time in the locked-in state does not flow like a river. It stagnates like a swamp. Day and night became abstract concepts defined only by the shifting light against the ceiling and the rhythm of the nursing shifts. But the most terrifying aspect wasn't the boredom or the immobility. It was the normalization of my erasure. In the beginning, people lowered their voices when they entered my room. They treated it like a chapel, a place of reverence and hushed tones. But as the weeks dragged into a month, the sanctity evaporated. My room ceased to be a place of healing and became a multifunction space. A lounge, a conference room, a place to take a call away from the noise of the city. I had become furniture, an expensive biomechanical lamp in the corner of the room. The shift happened after Dr. Aris delivered his final verdict. He stood at the foot of my bed, clicking a pen, A nervous tick I had begun to loathe, and looked at Elena, not me. The latest EEG shows minimal cortical activity, Aris said, lying through his teeth, or perhaps misinterpreting the storm of rage trapped inside my skull as background static. We are looking at a permanent vegetative state. He's stable, his organs are strong, but the Ethan inside? He's gone, Elena. What you see is just the shell. So he feels nothing? Marcus asked. He was leaning against the window frame, eating an apple. The crunch of the fruit was violently loud in the quiet room. Nothing, Aris confirmed. Sensory input goes in, but the brain doesn't process it. Pain, heat, cold. It's all just data with no user to read it. Thank you, doctor, Elena said. Her voice was steady, devoid of the theatrical sorrow she displayed for the nurses. Send the official report to the legal team by noon. We need it for the insurance. Filing. Once Aris left, the atmosphere in the room decompressed instantly. It was as if a director had yelled, "Cut!" and the actors could finally drop character. Marcus tossed the apple core into the waste bin near my head. He didn't miss. Well, that's that. Permanent vegetative state. It's the golden ticket. Don't call it that, Elena said, though she didn't sound angry. She walked over to the vanity and began applying lipstick in the mirror. She was getting ready to go out. It's a tragedy, a helpful tragedy, but a tragedy nonetheless. It means we can stop whispering, Marcus said, walking over to my bed. He looked down at me, his eyes scanning my face with the indifference of a man inspecting a damaged car bumper. Hey, buddy, you in there? Blink once for yes. He laughed, a short, sharp bark of a laugh. See? Nothing. Aris is right. The lights are on, but nobody's home. Stop taunting him, Marcus. It's morbid, Elena said, pressing her lips, together to blend the color. We have the branding meeting in an hour. Did you bring the mock-ups? They're on the tablet, Marcus said. He pulled a chair over, not the guest chair, but my ergonomic office chair he had rolled in from the study, and sat down next to my bed. He propped his feet up on the edge of the mattress, right next to my paralyzed legs. He opened his tablet and swiped through images. Here, look at this. He turned the screen toward Elena, but the angle allowed me to see it too. It was a logo. The sharp architectural V of Vance Dynamics was gone, replaced by a softer, more generic VD interlocked in a circle. Vance Davenport Global, Marcus read the text aloud. Davenport was his last name. It has a nice ring to me, merging the legacy with the future. Harrison will fight the name change, Elena noted, checking her reflection one last time. Harrison is irrelevant. We have the voting power now, Marcus countered. Besides, we need to distance the brand from Ethan. Vance Dynamics sounds like a one-man show, and that man is currently drooling on a pillow. The market needs to see stability, partnership. Adding my name calms the investors. And the robotics division? Elena asked. My heart would have skipped a beat if the pacemaker wasn't regulating it. The robotics division was my soul. It was the reason I built the company, to create prosthetics for veterans, to use tech for healing. It operated at a loss, but it was the moral compass of the corporation. Liquidated, Marcus said casually. I have a buyer in Shenzhen. They don't want the tech. They just want the patents. We sell the IP, shut down the lab in Brooklyn, and that cuts our overhead by 40% instantly. The stock will jump 10 points on the announcement alone. Do it, Elena said. No hesitation, no remorse. Ethan always held on to that money pit out of sentimentality. We can't afford sentimentality. They were carving up my life like a Thanksgiving turkey. The company, the name, the mission, everything was being stripped away while I watched, forced to endure the indignity of their casual cruelty. But the professional betrayal was nothing compared to what came next. Later that evening, they ordered dinner in. Sushi. They set up a small folding table at the foot of my bed, treating my room as a private dining area. The smell of soy sauce and wasabi filled the air, mingling with the antiseptic scent of my medical equipment. They were drinking sake. Elena had changed into a silk robe, my robe actually, the one I wore on Sunday mornings. Seeing her in it, laughing at something Marcus said, felt like a physical violation. God, this reminds me of Aspen, Marcus said, pouring more sake into her cup. Do you remember that blizzard? We were stuck in the lodge for 3 days. I remember, Elena smirked, picking up a piece of sashimi. Ethan was so worried about me. He kept calling the hotel front desk every hour to check the roads. He thought I was stranded alone. And you were very much not alone, Marcus grinned. My mind raced back to Aspen. Last February, Elena had gone for a girls' trip with her college friends. I had stayed behind to close the deal with the Department of Defense. I remembered the worry, the frantic calls when the storm hit, the relief when she finally called me back, claiming the cell service was down. I felt a little guilty then, Elena admitted, though her tone suggested otherwise, hearing his voicemail while you were in the shower. But honestly, the marriage was over long before the illness. He was just always working, always saving the world with his tech. He never saw me. He saw a trophy, Marcus said, leaning in. He didn't see the partner. That's why we work, Elena. We have the same vision. We want the same things. Power, she whispered, and freedom, he added. With the liquidation money, we can buy the villa in Como. We can run the board meetings from a yacht in the Mediterranean. Ethan built the engine, but we're the ones who are going to drive the car. How long? Elena asked suddenly, her gaze drifting to my face. How long does he stay like this? Eris said it could be years, decades. Not necessarily, Marcus said. His voice dropped, becoming conspiratorial. In these cases, complications are common. Pneumonia, an infection, a ventilator malfunction during a power outage. Nature has a way of taking its course, especially when the care relaxes. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were discussing the possibility of helping me along. Not yet, Elena said firmly. We need him alive for the SEC audit next quarter. If he dies now, the estate goes into probate and the assets freeze. We need him as the living figurehead until the transfer to the offshore accounts is complete. Fine, Marcus shrugged. He stays, as the mascot. He stood up and walked over to me, placing his empty sake cup on the tray of my ventilator stand. He patted my cheek, a hard, condescending slap. Hang in there, partner, he sneered. You're still useful to the company. You're the most expensive paperweight in New York. Elena laughed. She actually laughed. As they cleared the dinner and moved to the bed, my bed in the guest room down the hall, I was left in the dim light of the monitors. The anger that had fueled me in the beginning was changing. It was cooling, hardening into something denser, something sharper. It was no longer a fire, it was a blade. I knew the timeline now. I knew the extent of the betrayal. Aspen, the robotics division, the planned complications. They thought I was the funeral they were too polite to hold, but they had made a critical error in their assessment. They assumed the silence was empty. They didn't realize that in the silence, you hear everything. And I was memorizing every word, every date, every threat. The funeral was coming, certainly, but I would be the one choosing the casket. Pain was the only geography I had left. It was the only way I knew where the borders of my body ended and the rest of the world began. When you lie still for 20 hours a day, your muscles don't just relax, they shorten, they tighten like drying leather. To prevent me from curling into a fetal ball of calcified bone, I required daily range of motion therapy. Elena called it care. I called it torture. The torture was administered by Nurse Brenda. Brenda was not a healer, she was a transaction. She was one of the private agency nurses Elena had hired specifically because she didn't ask questions and she didn't care about the patient. She smelled of stale menthol cigarettes and cheap vanilla body spray, a cloying, suffocating combination that made me nauseous, though I couldn't vomit. All right, leg day, Brenda grunted. Look at my face, she never did. To her, I was a mannequin with a pulse. She grabbed my left ankle with a grip that was efficient but entirely devoid of compassion. She lifted my leg, pushing the knee toward my chest to stretch the hamstring. She pushed too hard. I felt the tendons scream, a white-hot line of fire shooting up my thigh. Stop, I shouted in the silent cavern of my mind. You're tearing it. She didn't stop. She was watching a video on her phone, propped up against my water pitcher. A reality TV show. Someone was crying about a wedding dress. Brenda pushed my leg another inch. The pain was blinding. It washed over the numbness, a tidal wave of sensation that crashed against the cliffs of my paralysis. And then, in the center of that agony, something snapped. Not a bone, a circuit. For months, my brain had been sending signals down a broken telephone line, shouting into the void. But in that moment of searing pain, the signal jumped the gap. My left index finger twitched. It wasn't a tremor. It wasn't the random firing of dying nerves. It was a response. I had wanted to push her hand away, and my finger had tried to obey. Brenda froze. She looked down at my hand resting on the white sheet. The finger was still now, but the disruption in the fabric was visible, a tiny wrinkle in the perfect smoothness of the bed linen. "Did you move?" she asked, her voice sharp. She dropped my leg. It fell back onto the mattress with a heavy thud that jarred my spine, and leaned over my hand. Panic, cold and absolute, flooded my chest. If she saw it, she would tell Elena. "Elena, he's moving. He's responding to pain." And then the conversation from the other night would replay in my head. In these cases, complications are common. If I woke up, I wouldn't be welcomed back as a husband or a CEO. I would be a liability, a witness, a loose end that needed to be tied off before the SEC audit. "Don't move," I commanded myself. The urge to try again, to prove to myself that the connection was real, was overwhelming. It was like being underwater and needing to breathe. But I held it. I visualized a dam wall slamming shut in my mind, holding back the neural flood. Brenda stared at my hand for a full 10 seconds. Then she poked my finger with her long, acrylic nail. Hard. I felt it. I felt the sharp pressure. My body wanted to recoil. The reflex arc was screaming, "Withdraw. Withdraw." I focused on the darkness. I focused on the void. I forced my mind to disconnect from the hand, to retreat into the deepest bunker of my consciousness. I am a stone. I am a stone. Stones don't feel. Nothing happened. My hand remained a dead weight. Brenda let out a breath, a sound of dismissal. "Just a spasm," she muttered, turning back to her phone. Muscles misfiring. Creepy. She went back to stretching my leg, but the indifference was gone from my mind. I barely felt the pain anymore. I was too busy processing the miracle. The connection was there. It was faint, like a radio signal drifting in and out of static. But it was there. The locked-in syndrome wasn't a wall. It was a pile of rubble. And rubble could be moved, stone by stone. That night, the true work began. The room was dark, illuminated only by the green glow of the vital signs monitor and the amber streetlights filtering through the sheer curtains. Elena was out. A charity gala at the Met, she had said, though I knew Marcus was her +1. I lay there and focused all my mental energy on my left index finger. Move, I thought. Nothing. Move. Nothing. It was exhausting. It felt like trying to lift a car with my mind. The effort made my heart rate rise. Beep, 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 beep. The monitor sped up. Calm down, I told myself. If the alarm goes off, the night nurse comes in. I slowed my breathing. I visualized the nerve endings. I imagined them as fiber optic cables that had been cut. I pictured myself as a tiny electrician in the dark, splicing the wires back together, red to red, blue to blue. I tried again. Finger, lift. I felt the ghost of the sensation, a tiny flicker of electricity running down my forearm, through the wrist, into the hand. The fingertip dragged against the sheet. Maybe a millimeter. It was the most beautiful movement I had ever seen. I did it again and again. By the fourth time, I was exhausted, drenched in a cold sweat that I couldn't wipe away. But I had confirmed it. The bridge was rebuilding. But with the hope came a terrifying realization of the discipline required. I had to recover in secret. I had to endure the physical therapy, the rough handling, the indignity of being bathed and changed, all without showing a single sign of life. I had to let them think I was fading while I was actually growing stronger. It was a spy game played within the confines of my own skin. The next morning, Elena came in before she left for the office. She looked hungover. Her makeup was fresh, but her eyes were red. She sat on the edge of the bed, smelling of coffee and guilt. "Morning, Ethan," she said, her voice hollow. She picked up my hand, the left one, the one I could move. She held it loosely. Marcus thinks we should sell the penthouse, she said almost to herself. He says it's too much overhead. He wants to move you to a facility in upstate New York. A nice one. The Meadows. It specializes in long-term care. She was discarding me. The penthouse was the last fortress. If they moved me to a facility, I would be isolated. No more overhearing business strategy. No more monitoring their affair. I would be a name on a clipboard in a room I couldn't leave, waiting for the inevitable pneumonia. Rage flared hot and bright. My finger twitched in her hand. I couldn't stop it. The anger bypassed my mental dam. It was a tiny movement, a reflexive grasp, as if I were trying to hold on to my home. Elena gasped. She dropped my hand as if it had burned her. She stared at me, her eyes wide. Ethan! She leaned in close, searching my face. Ethan, can you hear me? This was the moment, the precipice. If I showed her I was in there, maybe she would stop. Maybe the wife I had known for 10 years would return, horrified by what she had almost done. Maybe there was still a shred of humanity in her. But then I saw her eyes. There was no hope there, no relief. There was fear, pure, selfish fear. She wasn't looking at her husband. She was looking at a witness who had just returned from the dead to testify. If I squeezed her hand now, I wasn't saving myself. I was signing my death warrant. She would call Marcus. They would accelerate the timeline. I wouldn't make it to the facility. I wouldn't make it through the night. I summoned every ounce of willpower I possessed. I visualized the darkness. I mentally severed the limb. I let my eyes unfocus, staring past her, through her, into the blank void of the vegetable. Ethan, she whispered again, shaking my shoulder slightly. I remained limp. I slowed my breathing. I let my jaw slacken. She watched me for a long, agonizing minute. Then slowly, the tension left her shoulders. She let out a shaky laugh. God, I'm losing it, she muttered, standing up and smoothing her skirt. Just a spasm. Brenda said you had spasms. She looked at me one last time, her expression hardening back into the mask of the grieving widow. Goodbye, Ethan, she said coldly. I'll tell the realtors to come on Thursday. She walked out. I waited until the click of the door. Then, and only then, did I allow myself to feel the fear. It had been too close. I needed to be better. I needed to be a better actor than she was. But I also had a deadline now. Thursday. Realtors. I had 3 days to gain enough control to communicate. Not with them, never with them. I needed an ally. I looked at the ceiling, my finger twitching voluntarily against the sheet, tapping out a silent rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. It was the Morse code for SOS. I was back, and the war had just begun. The most difficult acting performance in the world is not crying on cue or feigning madness. It is doing absolutely nothing. For the next 3 weeks, I became a student of the void. I had to learn how to exist without inhabiting my own body. My recovery was microscopic but steady. The flicker in my finger had traveled up my arm. I could now feel the texture of the sheets against my palms. I could feel the itch of the nasal cannula. More importantly, I had regained the ability to control the focus of my eyes. Before, my vision had been a fixed camera lens, capturing only what was directly in front of me. Now I could track. I could shift my gaze from the window to the door, from the ceiling to the tablet screen, left carelessly on the bedside table. But this new power was my most dangerous secret. The human eye is a giveaway. It follows movement instinctively. If a glass fell, my eyes wanted to dart toward the sound. If Elena walked across the room, my gaze wanted to trace her path. I had to train myself to suppress this instinct. I practiced the 1,000-yard stare. When the door handle turned, I would mentally disengage, letting my eyes drift to a neutral middle distance, blurring my vision until the world became a smear of colors. I became a ghost haunting my own shell. They tested me, of course, not out of suspicion, but out of a morbid curiosity. Marcus would wave a hand in front of my face while talking on the phone. Elena would change her clothes right in front of me, checking to see if my pupils dilated. I gave them nothing. I was the furniture. I was the wallpaper. And because I was nothing, they told me everything. It was a Tuesday evening when the pieces of their grand design finally fell into place. The room was dim, lit only by the blue glow of 3 laptops spread across the duvet covering my legs. They were using my paralyzed body as a conference table. "The shell company in the Cayman Islands is active," Marcus said, typing furiously. "I've routed the liquidity from the robotics sale through ESOP Consulting. It looks like a legitimate vendor payment for restructuring services." "How much?" Elena asked. She was sitting in the armchair, nursing a glass of red wine. "12 million, Marcus replied. "Clean, untraceable, as long as the audit doesn't dig into the subcontractors." "Harrison is digging," Elena warned. "He sent an email to the CFO asking for the breakdown of the consulting fees. He suspects we're draining the reserves." "Let him suspect," Marcus scoffed. "He can't prove anything without the authorization codes, and the only person who has those codes is—" He paused, tapping his knuckles against my shin. "The vegetable." I lay there, listening to the theft of my life's work. ESOP Consulting. I filed the name away in the filing cabinet of my mind. ESOP, 12 million. Caymans. I repeated it like a mantra, burning it into my long-term memory. "We need to accelerate the Helix project," Elena said. Helix. I knew that name. It was a theoretical project I had shelved years ago, a high-risk data mining algorithm that violated user privacy laws. I had forbidden its development. "Already done," Marcus said. "I sold the prototype code to that firm in Moscow yesterday. They wired the first installment to the Zurich account this morning. That's another 8 million. My heart hammered against my ribs. They weren't just stealing money. They were selling dangerous tech to foreign entities. This wasn't just corporate fraud. This was federal crime. Treason, arguably. The list of charges I was compiling in my head was growing heavy. Fraud, embezzlement, corporate espionage. But then, the conversation shifted from the business to the biological. Marcus closed his laptop and rubbed his eyes. "Look, Elena, we have a cash flow issue coming up in Q3. The maintenance on this penthouse setup is astronomical. The private nurses, the equipment rental, Dr. Eris's retainer. It's costing us $50,000 a month." "He needs the care, Marcus," Elena said. For a second, I thought she was defending me. "If he deteriorates too visibly, questions will be asked. We can't have him dying of bed sores before the final transfer clears." "I'm not saying we kill him," Marcus said, his voice dropping to that reasonable, chilling tone of a businessman discussing budget cuts. "I'm saying we downgrade. We move him to the Meadows like we discussed, but we put him in the standard ward, not the private wing. We cut the specialized therapy. We stop the expensive experimental meds that are keeping his brain oxygenated. If we stop the meds," Elena trailed off. "If we stop the meds, nature takes its course," Marcus finished. "He's weak. Without the aggressive support, he'll catch a bug. Pneumonia, sepsis. It happens all the time in long-term care. It's sad, but it's expected." "When?" Elena asked. "The fiscal quarter ends on September 30th, Marcus said. "We move him on the 1st. By Christmas, you'll likely be a grieving widow, ready to inherit the entire estate free and clear." September 30th. I checked the digital clock on the wall. The date was August 15th. I had 6 weeks. 6 weeks before they moved me to a warehouse for the dying. 6 weeks before they stripped away the medicine that was keeping my neurons firing. 6 weeks before they murdered me by neglect. Panic is a cold thing when you can't move. It settles in the gut like a stone. I realized then that my passive strategy was no longer enough. I couldn't just gather evidence. I had to act. I had to find a way to get this information out of this room. But how? I couldn't speak. I couldn't write. My finger movement was barely visible. I looked at the tablet Marcus had left on the bedside table. It was face up. If I could just... "Oh, look at that," Marcus said, laughing. He leaned over and picked up the tablet. "He's crying." He wiped a tear from the corner of my eye with his thumb. "Involuntary lacrimal response," Elena recited, quoting Dr. Eris. "It means his eyes are dry." "No," Marcus whispered, leaning close to my ear. "I think he knows. Somewhere, deep down in the dark, I think he knows he's expired goods." He kissed Elena on the forehead. "I'm going to shower. Don't stay up too late staring at the plant. He walked into the bathroom. The shower started. Elena stood up. She walked over to the bed. She looked down at me, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she looked like the woman I had married. Soft, beautiful, the woman I had promised to protect. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she whispered, "but you were always married to the company. I'm just taking what I deserve." She turned off the bedside lamp, plunging me into semi-darkness. As she left the room, leaving me alone with the hum of the machines, a new resolve hardened within me. They had given me a deadline. They had given me a target. I had 6 weeks to destroy them. And I realized something else. The nursing schedule was changing next week. Brenda, the sadist, was going on vacation. Elena had mentioned a replacement agency. A new nurse meant a new variable, a stranger. I didn't need a miracle. I didn't need a SWAT team. I just needed one person who would look at me and see a man, not a paycheck. I lay there in the dark, practicing my breathing, in, out, in, out. I wasn't just breathing air. I was breathing in time, and every second I stayed alive was 1 second closer to their ruin. The variable arrived on a rainy Thursday night. Her name was Sarah. She was different from Brenda in every conceivable way. Where Brenda had been rough and indifferent, Sarah was efficient and gentle. She didn't smell of smoke. She smelled of antiseptic soap and peppermint gum. She didn't turn on the TV to drown out the silence. She worked quietly, humming a soft tune as she checked my vitals. But the most dangerous thing about Sarah was her eyes. She didn't look through me. She looked at me. "Hello, Mr. Vance," she said during her first shift, adjusting the pillows to relieve the pressure on my spine. "My name is Sarah. I'll be taking care of you tonight. I know this is uncomfortable, but I'm going to try to make it as easy as possible." She spoke to me like a person. It was a small dignity, but after months of being treated like a piece of faulty hardware, it felt profound. For the first 2 nights, I maintained my discipline. The 1,000-yard stare, the slack jaw, the rhythmic, shallow breathing of the vegetative. I watched her from the periphery of my vision. I saw her frown when she checked the charts Brenda had left. Charts that were likely falsified or incomplete. I saw her pause when she noticed the bruising on my arm from Brenda's rough handling. "This isn't right," I heard her whisper to herself as she applied a cooling gel to the bruise. She suspected neglect. That was good. But did she suspect murder? That was a leap I needed her to make. The opportunity came on the 3rd night. Elna and Marcus were out. A business dinner that would undoubtedly end in a hotel room. The penthouse was quiet, save for the storm battering the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sarah was sitting in the armchair, reading a paperback book by the light of a small clip-on lamp. She looked up, checking the monitors. Then she looked at me. I had been careless. I was watching the rain hit the glass, tracking the droplets as they raced down the pane. My eyes were focused, sharp, following the movement. Sarah froze. She put the book down slowly. She walked over to the bed. She didn't rush. She moved with the deliberate caution of someone approaching a startled animal. She leaned over me, blocking my view of the window. "Mr. Vance?" she asked softly. I unfocused my eyes immediately, staring past her ear. I tried to retreat into the void. "No," she whispered. "Don't do that. I saw you." She pulled a pen light from her pocket. "I saw you tracking the rain. That wasn't a reflex. Your eyes were following the pattern." She shined the light in my eyes. I didn't flinch. I let my pupils contract naturally, but I kept my gaze dead. "I've been a neurological nurse for 12 years, she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know the difference between a spasm and intent." "You're in there, aren't you?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the thunder outside. This was the gamble. If she was loyal to the paycheck, she would tell Elena. "Mrs. Vance, good news, he's waking up," and that would be my death sentence. But if she was loyal to the patient, I looked at her. I really looked at her. I locked my eyes onto hers and held the contact. I poured every ounce of desperation, every plea for help, into that stare. She gasped. She took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God," she breathed. She stepped closer again. "Can you understand me?" I blinked. Once, a slow, deliberate closure of the eyelids. Sarah's eyes widened. "Blink once for yes. 2 for no. Do you understand? Blink. She let out a shaky breath, tears springing to her eyes. Okay, does your wife know? Blink, blink, no. Does she think you're gone? Blink. Yes. Is that why you're hiding? Are you afraid? Blink. Yes. She looked around the room, suddenly paranoid. She checked the door, then the camera in the corner. The camera, she whispered. Does it have audio? Blink. Yes. She moved quickly. She went to the stereo system on the far wall and turned it on. Classical music, low but audible. Then she came, back to the bed and pretended to adjust my sheets, leaning her head close to mine so her body blocked the camera's view of my face. We have to be careful, she whispered, her lips inches from my ear. If they find out I know, they'll fire me. Or worse. She understood. She was smart. What do you need? She asked. Do you need the police? I hesitated. Police meant an investigation. An investigation meant I would be moved, evaluated, exposed. Elena would have time to destroy the evidence, to wipe the servers, to hide the money. The police were a blunt instrument. I needed a scalpel. Blink, blink, no. She looked confused. Not the police? A doctor? Blink, blink, no. Lawyer? Blink, yes. Your lawyer? Blink, yes. I don't know who that is, she whispered. I don't have access to your contacts. Your phone is locked in the safe. I moved my eyes to the left, toward the bookshelf where the leather-bound company directory was kept as a display piece. It was old school, but Harrison's name would be in it. The book? She asked, following my gaze. Blink. She walked over, picked up the directory, and brought it back. She flipped through it under the cover of checking my IV bag. Vance Dynamics directory. Okay, who am I looking for? She started reading names starting with A. This was going to take too long. Is it a department? She asked. Legal? Blink. She flipped to the L section. Legal department. Harrison Ford? She paused. No, that's the actor. Harrison Wells? Blink. Harrison Wells, General Counsel. She read. She memorized the number. Okay, I have it. Do you want me to call him? Blink. Now? Blink. I can't use the house line, she said. And if I use my cell, they might see the record if they audit the staff. But I have a burner for emergencies. She was a godsend. She stepped into the ensuite bathroom, leaving the door cracked just enough to monitor the room but muffling her voice from the main room's audio sensors. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could hear the murmur of her voice, urgent and low. She was gone for 5 minutes. To me, it felt like 5 years. When she returned, she looked pale. She resumed her position, adjusting the sheets, creating the privacy shield again. He didn't believe me at first, she whispered. He thought it was a prank, but I told him about the bruise. I told him about the ESOP file I saw on the table yesterday. I hadn't even realized she had seen that. Sarah was more observant than I could have hoped. He's listening now, she continued. He asked for a sign, something only you would know. He said, ask him about the fishing trip in 2018. He said, what did we catch? I closed my eyes, searching my memory. 2018, the retreat in Montana. We hadn't caught fish. We had spent 3 days drinking whiskey and fixing a broken generator in the cabin. He gave me options, Sarah whispered. Trout, salmon, nothing, or a cold? It was a trick question. We hadn't caught anything. But the running joke was that we caught pneumonia because the heating broke. But a cold was close enough. Trout? Blink, blink. Salmon? Blink, blink. Nothing? Blink, blink. A cold? Blink. Yes. Sarah nodded. She went back to the bathroom. This time the conversation was shorter. When she came back, her face was grim but determined. He believes you, she said. He's freaking out, but he believes you. He said he can't come here. If he shows up, Elena will know the gig is up and she'll block him. He needs to build a case to get emergency guardianship. She paused, checking the door again. He gave me instructions. He said you need to authorize him to access the black box server. He says you know what that means. He needs a key, a password. The black box. My private, encrypted server, the one that held the original IP for the robotics, the personal journals, the unedited backups of the company finances. It was the nuclear option. He said he can trigger a remote access protocol, Sarah relayed, but he needs the passkey. He's going to read the alphabet to me over the phone. You blink the letters. Can you do that? It was agonizingly slow. I was exhausted. My eyelids felt like sandpaper. But I had to do it. Blink. She went back to the bathroom doorway, holding the phone to her ear with one shoulder while watching me. Okay, go, she said to Harrison. A, B, C, D. Blink. D. D, she whispered. Next. A, B, C, D, E. Blink. E. D. E. It took 20 minutes. The passphrase was complex. Deadlift. The name of the first robot I ever built. He got it, Sarah whispered, her voice tight with adrenaline. He's in. He says, oh, wow. She listened for a moment longer. He says to sit tight. He says, don't. Let them kill you, Ethan. I'm coming for them. But I need time to trace the offshore accounts before I drop the hammer. Give me 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I looked at Sarah. She looked terrified, but she also looked fierce. She had just become an accomplice to a corporate war. I won't let them hurt you, she promised, squeezing my hand. This time I squeezed back, a weak, trembling pressure, but a squeeze nonetheless. We have a secret, Mr. Vance, she said, smoothing the sheets back to their pristine, hospital corner perfection. Now go back to sleep. You have a big performance tomorrow. As she sat back down in the chair and picked up her book, acting as if nothing had happened, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pain. It wasn't rage. It was hope. I wasn't alone in the coffin anymore. I had a shovel, and Harrison had the map. A Trojan horse doesn't need to be made of wood, and it doesn't need to be filled with soldiers. In the corporate world, a Trojan horse is made of paper, and it is filled with zeros. 2 weeks had passed since Sarah became my eyes and ears. In that time, my room had transformed from a prison into a command center, though to the untrained eye, nothing had changed. I was still the motionless lump in the bed. The ventilator still hissed its rhythmic lie, and the monitors still displayed the steady, uninspiring baseline of a man fading away. But under the sheets, a revolution was happening. When Sarah was on shift, we worked. She would lock the door, claiming she was doing sterile procedures, and I would train. I focused on my extremities. Flex the left calf. Hold for 10 seconds. Release. The atrophy was severe, but muscle memory is a powerful thing. The twitching in my fingers had become a controlled grip. I could squeeze Sarah's hand with palpable force now. I could rotate my ankles. The most difficult part was the restraint. My body wanted to move, to stretch, to break the calcified stiffness that had plagued me for months. But I had to remain a statue. I had to let Marcus slap my face and let Elena adjust my limbs like I was a doll. Harrison is ready, Sarah whispered one night, pretending to change my IV bag while Marcus watched TV in the corner of the room. The offer goes live tomorrow morning. The trap was set. Harrison had created a shell company, Apex Capital, registered in Luxembourg. It was a masterpiece of corporate fiction. Apex was an aggressive private equity firm looking to acquire distressed tech assets. And they were about to make an offer for Vance Dynamics that was too good to be true. The next morning, the chaos began. I heard Marcus shouting on the phone in the hallway before he even entered the room. I don't care who they are. Verify the funds. If this is real, it changes everything. He burst into the bedroom, his face flushed with the kind of adrenaline that only money can generate. Elena was right behind him, still, in her silk pajamas, looking equally manic. It's $300 million above market valuation, Elena, Marcus said, pacing around my bed as if I were a campfire they were warming their hands over. Cash, an immediate buyout of all controlling shares. They want the patents, the brand, everything. Who are they? Elena asked, her hands shaking as she poured coffee. Apex Capital, European money. They say they want to corner the robotics market before the Asian sector recovers. But there's a catch. There's always a catch. They want a clean slate clause, Marcus explained, stopping at the foot of my bed. He looked at me, a predator evaluating the carcass. They are worried about Ethan. They know he's the visionary. They are terrified that if he wakes up or if he retains any cognitive function, he'll sue to block the sale or claim the IP was stolen. So the contract requires a certificate of irreversible incapacity, Marcus said. We have to sign an affidavit backed by a current medical evaluation stating that Ethan Vance has zero cognitive function, zero chance of recovery, and is essentially legally dead. If he ever wakes up and contests it, we are liable for triple damages. We'd be bankrupt. Elena looked at me. I kept my eyes fixed on the ceiling, my breathing shallow and mechanical. I had practiced this moment. I had to look empty. I had to look like a $300 million obstacle. He's not waking up, Marcus, Elena said softly. Look at him. It's been months. Eris said his brain is mush. We need to be sure, Marcus said. If we sign this, and he twitches a finger next year, we go to prison for fraud. The indemnity clause is brutal. He won't twitch, Elena said, her voice hardening. We'll make sure of it. Sign the deal. The greed was blinding them. Harrison had designed the clause specifically to trigger their avarice. He knew they were desperate to liquidate before the quarterly. Audit exposed their embezzlement. Apex Capital offered them a golden parachute, but they had to jump without checking the rig. 2 days later, the closing took place in my bedroom. They brought in a notary, a man I didn't recognize, likely chosen for his discretion and lack of questions. Dr. Aris was there too, sweating in a cheap suit. The patient's condition is unchanged, Aris recited for the notary, signing a document on the bedside table. Permanent vegetative state. No cortical response to stimuli. The prognosis is terminal. Aris was signing his medical license away, and he didn't even know it. And the affidavit for the sellers? The notary asked. Marcus stepped up. He placed a thick stack of documents on the rolling table that hovered over my legs. I, Marcus Davenport, acting COO, certify that to the best of my knowledge, the founder is incapacitated and unable to consent. Scratch. Scratch. The sound of the pen was a thunderclap. Mrs. Vance? The notary prompted. Elena stepped forward. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. She looked at my face. This was the final betrayal. She wasn't just stealing the company. She was legally declaring me dead while I lay warm in the bed next to her. I certify, she whispered. She signed. And finally, the notary said, the buyers require a biometric confirmation. Since Mr. Vance cannot sign, they want a thumbprint on the transfer of the controlling interest shares, just to ensure the chain of custody. This was the masterstroke. Harrison had insisted on this. Marcus grabbed my right hand. He didn't be gentle. He jammed my thumb onto an ink pad, then pressed it hard against the paper. There, Marcus said, wiping the ink from my thumb with a tissue and tossing it on the floor. Done. Vance Dynamics is history. We are rich. When do the funds wire? Elena asked, staring at the signed papers. Escrow clears in 48 hours, Marcus grinned. Friday at noon. We'll be on the plane to the Caymans by Saturday morning. They popped a bottle of champagne. The cork flew across the room and hit the cardiac monitor. Ping. They toasted over my body. They drank to their wealth, to their freedom, and to the tragic end of Ethan Vance. But they didn't know what had happened 5 minutes before they walked in. Sarah had come in to check my vitals. In reality, she had placed a small, high-fidelity voice recorder under my pillow. It was recording every word, the declaration of my mush brain, the admission that they were fleeing, the explicit agreement to the fraud clauses. And more importantly, they didn't know about the timestamp. The moment my thumb hit that paper, a digital alert was sent to Harrison's server. Harrison had set up the Apex Capital portal to log the biometric data. But here was the twist. Harrison had also filed a sealed motion with the Supreme Court of New York that morning. The motion included a video Sarah had taken the night before, a video of me. In the video, holding a newspaper with yesterday's date, I looked into the camera and blinked a clear, coherent message in Morse code. I am here. I do not consent. The timeline was now indisputable. Point A, 9 a.m. Video evidence proves Ethan Vance is conscious and communicative. Point B, 2 p.m. Marcus and Elena sign a legal affidavit stating Ethan Vance is a vegetable to secure a multi-million-dollar payout. It was perfect. It wasn't just theft anymore. It was undeniable, documented grand larceny and insurance fraud, notarized by the perpetrators themselves. As they laughed and drank their champagne, I felt a deep, cold satisfaction. They were celebrating a harvest, but they didn't realize they had just eaten poison. To the end of an era, Marcus said, raising his glass. To a new life, Elena replied, clinking her glass against his. I lay still, my thumb still stained with the ink of their crime. Enjoy the champagne, I thought, because on Friday at noon, the only thing clearing will be the police warrants. But there was one final hurdle. They planned to leave on Saturday. The funds cleared Friday. I needed to make sure they didn't run before the trap snapped shut. And I needed to make sure they didn't decide to euthanize me before they left, just to tie up the loose end. That night, after the champagne had worn off and the house was quiet, Marcus came back into the room alone. He stood over me, swaying slightly. He smelled of alcohol and malice. You know, he whispered, I almost feel bad for you. Almost. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a syringe. My blood ran cold. Eris left this, Marcus slurred, just in case you got restless. A little muscle relaxant. Too much, and the diaphragm just stops. He uncapped the needle. We can't have you lingering, Ethan. It's messy. If you die tonight, we mourn. We cremate you tomorrow, and we fly out Saturday with the ashes in a Louis Vuitton urn. It's cleaner. He brought the needle toward my IV port. This wasn't in the plan. Harrison couldn't stop this. Sarah wasn't here. I had to break cover. I had to move. But if I moved, he might panic and stab me or smother me with the pillow. I was still weak. I couldn't fight a full-grown man. I needed a distraction. I focused everything on the cardiac monitor. I visualized stress, fear, panic. I forced my breathing to stop. I held it. The monitor sensed the apnea. The heart rate spiked as my body panicked for air. Beep, 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 beep. The alarm screamed through the penthouse. Marcus flinched, dropping the syringe. It rolled under the bed. Damn it, he hissed. He heard footsteps running down the hall. Elena. What happened? She yelled, bursting into the room. Nothing. The machine just went crazy, Marcus lied, kicking the syringe deeper under the bed. Is he dying? Elena asked, looking at the monitor, which was flashing red. I don't know. Call Eris. Don't let him die before the money clears, you idiot, Elena screamed. If he dies tonight, the autopsy happens before the transfer. The deal is void if the seller dies during escrow. Marcus froze. He hadn't thought of that. The greed saved me. Right, Marcus breathed. Right. Keep him alive until Friday. Just until Friday. He hit the silence button on the alarm. He looked at me, his eyes full of hate. You lucky bastard, he muttered. They didn't know how lucky I was, or how unlucky they were about to be. I exhaled, the machine settling back into a rhythm. 2 days. I just had to survive 2 days. There is a specific kind of cruelty in dressing a man for his own funeral while he is still alive to watch it. At 5:10 p.m. on Friday, the stylists arrived. They weren't medical staff. They were image consultants. They stripped me of the hospital gown that had been my uniform for 6 months and manhandled my stiff limbs into a bespoke tuxedo. It was the same tuxedo I had worn to the Met Gala 2 years ago, but now it hung loosely on my frame. I had lost 30 pounds of muscle. The jacket bunched at the shoulders, and the collar gaped around my neck. He looks pale, Elena criticized, standing in the doorway with a glass of champagne in her hand. She was already dressed, shimmering in a silver gown that looked like liquid mercury. Put some bronzer on him. He looks like a corpse. We need him to look tragically noble, not dead. The makeup artist, a young woman who looked terrified, dabbed cold powder onto my cheeks. She combed my hair, spraying it with enough fixative to withstand a hurricane. Then came the sunglasses. Dark aviator-style lenses meant to hide the lack of focus in my eyes, but serving the dual purpose of dehumanizing me completely. I was no longer Ethan Vance, the CEO. I was a prop, a marionette waiting for the strings to be pulled. Perfect, Marcus said, entering the room. He was adjusting his cufflinks, diamond ones I noticed. The guests are arriving. The press is set up in the atrium. Remember the narrative, Elena. Brave battle, stepping down for his health. New leadership ensures the legacy. I know the lines, Marcus, she snapped, smoothing her dress. Is the transfer confirmed? The wire hit the offshore account at 12:01 p.m. Marcus grinned. We are liquid. 300 million. By this time tomorrow, we'll be drinking mojitos on the deck of the Siren. They wheeled me out at 7:00 p.m. The penthouse had been transformed. The medical equipment was hidden behind tasteful silk screens. Waiters circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Mozart, my favorite, turned into background noise for the people stealing my life. Being wheeled into a room full of people who think you are a vegetable is a surreal, sociological experiment. I was parked near the baby grand piano, positioned like a statue or a piece of abstract art. People approached me with a mixture of morbid curiosity and performative pity. "Oh, it's just heartbreaking," whispered Mrs. Calloway, a board member's wife, staring at me through the dark lenses of my glasses. She didn't look at me. She looked at the spectacle of me. He was such a brilliant man to end up like this, drooling in a chair. "At least Elena has found strength," her husband replied, sipping his drink. "And Marcus, they've really stepped up. The stock is up since the acquisition rumor started." "It's a blessing, really," Mrs. Calloway sighed. "He doesn't know what's happening. He's in a better place mentally." "I am right here, you vultures," I thought. "I can hear the ice clinking in your glass. I can smell your expensive perfume trying to cover the scent of your ambition." I focused on my breathing. In, out. The restraint required was excruciating. My legs, hidden under the tuxedo trousers, were itching to move. The adrenaline coursing through my system was fighting the sedatives they thought I was still on. But I had to wait. The timing had to be surgical. Across the room, I saw Elena holding court. She was crying. A single, perfect tear rolled down her cheek as she spoke to a reporter from the Wall Street Journal. "It's the hardest decision of my life," I heard her say, her voice catching theatrically. "But Ethan would want the company to survive. He would want his vision to continue, even if he can't be the one to guide it. Marcus has been my rock." Marcus stood beside her, looking solemn and capable. He placed a protective hand on her lower back. To the reporter, it looked like support. I knew it was ownership. Then I saw him, Harrison. He was standing by the terrace doors, far away from the center of attention. He looked uncomfortable in his tuxedo, fidgeting with his tie. He wasn't drinking. He was scanning the room, checking the exits, checking the security. He caught my eye. Because of the sunglasses, no one else could tell where I was looking. But Harrison knew. He looked directly at me and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Then he tapped his watch. "It's time." The signal meant the police were in position. It meant the digital evidence was locked. It meant the Apex Capital fraud was fully documented, and the trap had snapped shut the moment the wire transfer cleared. But Harrison didn't move to stop the party. We had agreed on this. The arrest couldn't happen in a back room. It had to happen after the lie was spoken publicly. We needed them to commit to the narrative on camera. We needed the headline. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice boomed over the speakers. The music died down. The chatter stopped. Marcus stepped up to a podium that had been set up in front of the fireplace. He tapped the microphone. "Thank you all for coming. Tonight," Marcus began, his voice smooth and commanding, "we are here to celebrate the legacy of a visionary, a friend, a husband." He gestured toward me. A spotlight swung around and blinded me. I felt the heat of the bulb on my face. "Ethan Vance changed the world," Marcus continued. "But as many of you know, tragedy strikes without warning. For the past 6 months, Elena and I have fought to preserve his work while caring for the man. But the medical reality is unforgiving." A hush fell over the room. "It is with a heavy heart that we announce the transition of Vance Dynamics," Marcus said. "To ensure stability, we have accepted an acquisition offer that will secure the company's future. And as for Ethan, he will be moving to a specialized facility in Switzerland where he can receive the palliative care he deserves." Switzerland. That was a new lie. Switzerland was code for out of sight, out of mind, until he stops breathing. "I would like to invite my partner and the bravest woman I know, Elena Vance, to say a few words." Marcus said, stepping back to applause. Elena walked to the microphone. The applause was thunderous. She wiped her eyes and smiled, a brave, tragic smile. "Thank you," she whispered into the mic. Ethan can't speak for himself anymore, so I have to speak for him." She walked over to my wheelchair. The spotlight followed her. She placed a hand on my shoulder. "He is silent," she said, looking down at me with a look of profound, fabricated love. "But I know that if he could talk, he would thank Marcus for saving his company. He would thank you all for your support. He would tell you that he is ready to rest." She squeezed my shoulder. It was the cue for the audience to cry, the cue for the curtain to fall on my life. "He is at peace," or she lied. "He is gone." The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the distant siren of a police car, a siren that was getting louder. This was it. She had just declared me mentally incompetent and gone in front of 200 witnesses and a live press feed. She had cemented the fraud. I took a deep breath. I felt the air fill my lungs, expanding my chest against the stiff tuxedo shirt. I focused on my legs. Plant the feet. I focused on my core. Engage. I focused on my hands. Grip the armrests. Elena turned back to the microphone to finish her speech. "So tonight, we say goodbye to Ethan Vance, the CEO, and we..." Clack. The sound of the wheelchair brake being released was sharp and loud in the silence. Elena froze. She turned around slowly. I wasn't slumped anymore. I was sitting up straight. My head was lifted. I reached up and took off the sunglasses. The light stung my eyes, but I didn't blink. I looked directly at the camera crew. Then I looked at Marcus, whose face had gone the color of ash. Finally, I looked at Elena. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like she was seeing a ghost. In a way, she was. I didn't scream. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I reached out and grabbed the microphone stand, pulling it toward me. The feedback whine pierced the room, making everyone wince. "I think," I said, my voice raspy from disuse but amplified by the speakers to boom across the room, "that I would like to speak for myself." The glass in Mrs. Calloway's hand shattered on the floor. The silence that followed my first sentence was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes an explosion. 200 of New York's elite, bankers, tech moguls, journalists, and social climbers, stood frozen, their champagne flutes halfway to their lips, staring at the man who had just risen from the dead. Elena was the first to move. Her survival instinct, honed by years of climbing social ladders, kicked in faster than her logic. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She lunged for me, her face contorting into a mask of desperate, terrified concern. "Ethan!" she cried out, her voice pitching up into a hysterical sob. She rushed forward, arms wide, trying to close the distance between us. "Oh my God, it's a miracle! He's awake! Call the doctor! He's delirious!" She reached for the microphone, her nails digging into my hand, trying to pry my fingers loose from the stand. She wanted to hug me, to bury her face in my chest, to muzzle me with her body and claim this moment as a divine intervention that she could later spin. I didn't let her. I turned my torso, breaking her grip with a strength she didn't know I had regained. I looked at her, coldly, clinically. Then I shoved her. It wasn't a violent strike, just a firm, dismissive push to the chest. But in the dead silence of the room, the impact was shocking. Elena stumbled back, her high heels catching on the carpet, and she fell hard onto the stage. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. "Stay down, Elena," I said. My voice was raspy, grating against a throat that hadn't spoken in months, but it was steady. I turned back to the microphone. I looked directly into the lens of the primary camera broadcasting the live feed. "I am not delirious," I said, my voice booming through the speakers. "And this is not a miracle. This is an evidence hearing." Marcus started moving. I saw him in my peripheral vision, edging toward the service exit behind the bar. He was pale, sweating, his eyes darting like a trapped rat. "Don't bother, Marcus," I said, calling him out by name. I pointed a finger at him without looking away from the camera. The elevators have been disabled. The service stairs are locked, and the gentlemen standing by the doors are not waiters. The guests turned to look. The large men in dark suits by the exits crossed their arms. They weren't serving drinks. They were serving warrants. Marcus froze. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the arrogance crumble into pure terror. Ladies and gentlemen, I continued, gripping the podium to steady my shaking legs, you were invited here tonight to witness the end of Ethan Vance. You were told I was a vegetable. You were told I was gone. My wife and my business partner stood on this stage and asked for your sympathy while they sold my company out from under me. He's having a psychotic break, Elena shrieked from the floor, trying to scramble up. He doesn't know what he's saying. His brain is damaged. Is it? I asked. Harrison, play the tape. Harrison, standing by the audiovisual booth, hit a key on his laptop. The large projection screen behind me, which had been displaying a slideshow of Ethan Vance, A Life in Tech, flickered. The image changed. It was a video, grainy, black and white, taken from a hidden camera angle, the view from under my pillow. The date stamp was from 3 days ago. The audio boomed through the gala speakers. It was Marcus's voice, clear and undeniable. I, Marcus Davenport, acting COO, certify that to the best of my knowledge, the founder is incapacitated and unable to consent. Then Elena's voice. I certify. Then the sound of the stamp. And finally the chilling kicker, the conversation that followed. If he dies tonight, the autopsy happens before the transfer. The deal is void if the seller dies during escrow. Right. Keep him alive until Friday. Just until Friday. The gasp from the room was different this time. It wasn't shock. It was horror. The guests recoiled from Elena and Marcus as if they were contagious. Mrs. Calloway looked like she was going to be sick. The video cut. I looked back at the crowd. They didn't just plan to sell my company, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. They planned to let me die of neglect once the check cleared. They discussed the timing of my death like it was a logistics issue. Elena was standing now, but she was shaking so hard she could barely stay upright. She looked at the screen, then at the crowd, seeing her reputation incinerated in real time. That's manipulated, she stammered, pointing at the screen. That's AI. It's a deep fake. Marcus, tell them. Marcus didn't say anything. He was looking at his phone, likely checking his bank accounts. It's not a deep fake, Elena, I said, and neither is the buyer. I took a step closer to the edge of the stage. You thought you were selling Vance Dynamics to Apex Capital, a European investment firm. You thought you were securing a $300 million exit, but you didn't check who owns Apex Capital. I signaled Harrison again. A document appeared on the screen. The Articles of Incorporation for Apex Capital. Apex Capital is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Vance Trust, I revealed. I bought my own company, Elena, using the emergency funds you couldn't access because you didn't know the passcodes. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her eyes went wide. I didn't pay you with foreign money, I said, savoring the moment. I moved my own money from my left pocket to my right pocket. But in doing so, I forced you to sign a federal affidavit declaring me incompetent while I was fully conscious. That is fraud. That is perjury. And the wire transfer triggered federal wire fraud statutes the moment it crossed state lines. Marcus dropped his phone. It clattered on the hardwood floor. You set us up, Marcus whispered. It was the first time he had spoken. You were awake the whole time. I was awake when you kissed my wife over my paralyzed body, I said, letting the venom finally seep into my voice. I was awake when you discussed pulling the plug to save money on nursing care. I was awake when you laughed about the vegetable I looked at, the press pit. The cameras were flashing rapidly now, capturing the face of a man who had returned from hell to burn down the house. The headline you wanted for tomorrow was Ethan Vance, a tragic end, I said, but I think we can do better. I paused, looking directly at the Wall Street Journal reporter who had been interviewing Elena earlier. Write this down, I commanded. The king is back, and he is cleaning house. Elena let out a wail, a guttural sound of defeat. She lunged toward me again, her hands clawing the air. I did it for us. Ethan, I did it for us. You were gone. I was alone. Before she could reach me, two uniformed NYPD officers stepped onto the stage. They didn't look like waiters anymore. "Elena Vance," one officer said, grabbing her wrist and twisting it behind her back. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and grand larceny." "No, get off me!" she screamed, thrashing as the cuffs clicked shut. "I am the victim. Here, he trapped me. That's entrapment." "Save it for the lawyer," the officer said, marching her toward the stairs. Across the room, Marcus didn't fight. He stood still as the officers approached him. He looked at me one last time, his eyes dead. He knew the game was over. He knew that the recordings I had were likely just the tip of the iceberg. He held out his wrists, accepting the metal bracelets with the resignation of a man who knows the math doesn't work in his favor anymore. As they were dragged out, Elena screaming, Marcus silent, the room remained quiet. I stood alone on the stage. My legs were trembling violently now. The adrenaline was fading, and the physical reality of my atrophy was crashing down on me. I felt dizzy. The room spun. Harrison rushed up the stairs. He grabbed my arm, supporting my weight before I could collapse. "You did it, Ethan," he whispered in my ear. "It's over. We got them." I leaned heavily on him. I looked out at the sea of faces, my friends, my peers. They looked terrified. They were wondering if they had ever said anything compromising in front of me. They were wondering if they were next. I leaned back into the microphone one last time. "The gala is over," I said. "Get out of my house." Harrison helped me into the wheelchair. As he wheeled me off the stage, the cameras kept flashing, blinding white lights that felt like explosions. But I didn't close my eyes. I had kept them open in the dark for 6 months. I wasn't going to close them now that I had finally won the light. But as we reached the hallway, away from the noise and the spectacle, the exhaustion hit me. I slumped in the chair. "Sarah," I rasped. "I'm here," she said, appearing from the shadows of the kitchen. She had been watching the whole thing. She was crying, but she was smiling. "Get me out of this suit," I whispered, "and get me a real drink." "Doctor's orders say no alcohol," she said, gently placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'm the CEO again," I murmured, closing my eyes as the adrenaline finally crashed. "I make the rules." The war was won. The enemy was in chains. But as I sat there in the hallway of my empty, silent penthouse, I realized that the battle for my life was just beginning. I had my company, I had my revenge, but I had nothing else. The adrenaline that had sustained me on the stage evaporated the moment the police lights faded from the street below. In its place came a crushing, bone-deep fatigue. My body, pushed far beyond its limits by the performance of the gala, finally collected the debt. I spent the next 3 days in the same hospital wing I had fought so hard to avoid, but this time, the guards at the door were on my payroll, and the doctors were vetted by Harrison. Recovery is not a montage. It is ugly. It is IV drips to correct severe dehydration, physical therapy that feels like tearing muscle from bone, and police detectives sitting by your bed asking you to recount the worst months of your life for the official record. "Did you fear for your life on the night of August 15th? Detective Miller asked, his pen hovering over a yellow notepad. "I feared for my life every night, Detective," I replied, my voice raspy but returning. "But specifically on the 15th, I heard them discuss the lethal dosage of insulin required to mimic heart failure. That tends to stick in one's memory." The legal machinery Harrison had built was a thing of terrifying beauty. It didn't just strike, it pulverized. The first domino to fall after the gala was Dr. Aris. He didn't even make it out of the building. Police found him trying to flush his phone down the toilet in the guest bathroom. He was charged with medical malpractice, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. When they offered him a plea deal, he sang like a canary. He gave up the falsified charts, the kickbacks from Marcus, and the specific instructions Elena had given him to keep the patient sedated but stable. Aris's testimony was the nail in Elena's coffin. From her holding cell at Rikers Island, Elena tried one last desperate gambit. She hired a high-profile defense attorney who specialized in spinning narratives for the tabloids. On the third day, a statement was released to the press. "Mrs. Vance is a victim of coercive control," the statement read. "She was manipulated by Mr. Davenport into actions she did not understand. While under extreme emotional duress, due to her husband's condition. She was trying to play the naive, grieving wife led astray by the big bad wolf. I was sitting in my hospital bed, watching the news report on the tablet Sarah had brought me. "She's good," Sarah noted, peeling an orange for me. "She almost sounds convincing." "She is good," I agreed, "but she forgot about the Aspen tape." I called Harrison. "Release the Aspen audio, the one where she laughs, about my voicemail." 2 hours later, the recording hit the internet. The world heard Elena's voice, clear and uncoerced, mocking my concern for her safety while she was in bed with Marcus, months before my illness. They heard the cold, calculated greed in her voice as she discussed the golden ticket of my vegetative state. The victim narrative disintegrated instantly. Public sympathy curdled into revulsion. The headlines shifted from "wife charged in tragedy" to "the Black Widow of Wall Street." But the personal purge was only half the battle. The corporate purge was the real war. 1 week after the gala, I rolled into the boardroom of Vance Dynamics. I was still in a wheelchair, but I made sure to wear a suit, not a robe. The oxygen tube was gone. The room was full. The board members, the executives, the department heads, they all stood up when I entered. The silence was thick with fear. These were people who had clapped for Marcus, people who had signed off on the liquidation of the robotics division. I didn't wheel to the head of the table. I stayed by the door, blocking the exit. "Sit down," I commanded. They sat. "Harrison," I said. Harrison walked around the table, placing a single sheet of paper in front of 12 specific people. The CFO, the VP of Marketing, the head of HR. "If you have a paper in front of you," I said, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone, "it is a termination notice for cause. You are fired, effective immediately." "Ethan, this is unreasonable," the CFO stammered, his face red. "I was following orders from the acting CEO. I had a fiduciary duty." "You had a duty to question why we were selling patents to a shell company in the Caymans for pennies on the dollar." I cut him off. "You didn't question it because Marcus promised you a retention bonus from the proceeds. I saw the emails. Get out." "But my stock options are void," Harrison interjected, "under the faithless servant doctrine. You helped defraud the company. You get nothing. Be glad we aren't suing you for damages yet." They left. 12 people. The room felt lighter, cleaner. "For the rest of you," I said to the survivors, "you kept your heads down. I understand self-preservation, but the culture of this company changes today. Marcus Davenport is gone. His name is being chiseled off the building as we speak. The Vance Davenport rebranding is dead." I rolled forward, stopping at the empty chair at the head of the table. Marcus's chair. I didn't sit in it. I pushed it over. It clattered to the floor. "We are reopening the robotics division," I announced, "and we are going to audit every single transaction from the last 6 months. If you stole a paperclip, put it back, because I am watching." The meeting ended. As the room cleared, I felt a strange lack of satisfaction. I had expected triumph. I had expected to feel like the Count of Monte Cristo. Instead, I just felt tired. I had cut out the cancer, but the surgery had left deep scars. The company was safe, but it was hollowed out. That evening, I returned to the penthouse. It was a crime scene no longer, but it didn't feel like home. The cleaners had scrubbed everything, but I could still see the ghost of the hospital bed in the center of the living room. I could still smell the antiseptic. Sarah was there, packing her bag. Her contract was technically up. "Where are you going?" I asked, wheeling into the kitchen. "Home, Mr. Vance," she said. "The agency sent a replacement, a regular nurse. You don't need a spy anymore." "I don't need a spy," I said. "I need a friend, and I need someone I trust. That list is currently very short. It has one name on it." She paused, zipping up her bag. "I'm a nurse, Ethan, not a corporate assistant." "I know, but I still have a long recovery ahead. The doctors say 6 months of PT before I can walk without a cane. I don't want to do that with a stranger. Stay." She looked at me. She saw the man behind the CEO title, the man who was terrified of being alone in the house where his wife had tried to kill him. "Double my rate?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. "Triple," I said, "and no uniform." "Deal." She unpacked her bag. Later that night, Harrison called. "It's done," he said. "The judge denied bail for both of them. They are flight risks. They'll be in holding until the trial." "Good." "There's one more thing, Ethan," Harrison said, his voice softening. "Elena sent a letter. Through her lawyer. She wants you to read it." "Burn it," I said immediately. "Ethan." "Burn it, Harrison. I don't want her words in my head. I listened to her for 6 months. I know exactly what she has to say. She's sorry she got caught. That's it." "Understood. I'll shred it." I hung up. I wheeled myself to the window, the same window where I had watched the rain and learned to blink. The city lights of Manhattan sprawled out below me, a grid of electricity and ambition. The purge was complete. The enemies were gone. The rats were exterminated. But as I looked at the reflection in the glass, a gaunt man in a wheelchair, alone in a multi-million-dollar glass box, I realized the hardest part wasn't destroying the old life. It was figuring out what the hell to build in the empty lot that remained. I was free. But freedom, I was discovering, was just another word for having nothing left to lose. Closure is a myth invented by therapists to make the billable hours feel worth it. There is no such thing as a clean break. There are only jagged edges that you eventually learn to stop cutting yourself on. It was January in Manhattan. The city was a grayscale etching of concrete and dirty snow. I stood on the unfinished 42nd floor of the new Vance Dynamics Research Center in Brooklyn, leaning heavily on my cane. The cane was made of carbon fiber, black, matte, indestructible. It was a necessity, not an affectation. The atrophy in my left leg had improved, but the nerve damage was a permanent souvenir of the months I spent rotting in my own bed. "The load-bearing walls are reinforced with the new alloy," Julianne said, pointing to the steel skeleton of the structure. She was the lead architect on the project, smart, sharp, with eyes that actually smiled when her mouth did. "It can withstand a magnitude 8 earthquake. It's overkill for New York, but given your specifications—" "I like overkill," I interrupted, my voice flat. "Overkill implies safety." Julianne looked at me. She held the gaze a second too long. "Safety seems to be your priority these days, Mr. Vance." She wasn't wrong. 6 months had passed since the gala. In that time, the legal system had ground Elena and Marcus into dust. The trial had been short. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury took less than 3 hours to convict on all counts. Elena got 25 years. Marcus got 20. I didn't go to the sentencing. I read about it in the Times while drinking coffee in my kitchen. I felt nothing. No joy, no vindication. Just the mild satisfaction of checking a task off a list. The divorce had been finalized last week. It was a thick stack of papers that officially untethered me from the woman who had poisoned my tea. I signed them with the same pen I used to sign supplier contracts. "Are you listening, Ethan?" Julianne asked. I snapped back to the present. "Sorry, you were talking about the glass." "I was asking if you wanted to grab dinner," she said. She adjusted her hard hat, looking slightly nervous. "To discuss the glass, or just to eat?" It was a simple invitation, a normal human interaction. Julianne was attractive. She was intelligent. She was not Elena. But as I looked at her, my brain didn't see a potential date. It saw a threat assessment. Why does she want dinner? Is she digging for a story? Is she working for a competitor? Does she know who I am? Or does she know the victim from the news? If I let her close, what is her angle? The paranoia was automatic. It was a reflex, like pulling your hand away from a hot stove. I had spent 6 months listening to the person who supposedly loved me the most plot my murder. That kind of wiring doesn't just unravel because the judge banged a gavel. "I can't," I said, the rejection coming out colder than I intended. "I have a meeting." The light in Julianne's face dimmed. "Right, of course. Just a thought." She turned back to the blueprints, her professionalism instantly re-erecting the wall between us. I walked away, the tap, tap, tap of my cane echoing on the concrete floor. I hated myself for it, but I didn't know how to stop it. I was safe, yes, but I was also alone inside a fortress of my own making. I returned to the penthouse at 8 p.m. The place had been gutted. I couldn't live in the mausoleum Elena had decorated. The marble was gone, replaced by warm wood and industrial steel. That bedroom, had been converted into a gym. I slept in the guest wing now. Sarah was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. She wasn't wearing scrubs. She was wearing jeans and a sweater. She had stayed on, ostensibly as my medical liaison. But in reality, she was the only person on earth I could tolerate for more than an hour. "You're home early," she said, not looking up. "I thought you were checking the site with the architect. The pretty one." "She asked me to dinner," I said, pouring a glass of water. Sarah stopped chopping. She looked at me, the knife hovering over a carrot. And I told her I had a meeting." Sarah sighed. She put the knife down. "Ethan, you don't have a meeting. I manage your calendar. You have a date with a reheat lasagna and a stack of quarterly reports." "I'm not ready, Sarah. It's been 6 months. "It's been a lifetime," I snapped. I gripped the counter, my knuckles turning white. "You didn't hear them, Sarah. You didn't hear the way Elena laughed about me dying. You didn't feel her kiss him 3 feet away from your face. Every time someone smiles at me now, I look for the knife in their other hand." Sarah walked around the island. She didn't hug me. She knew I still flinched at sudden contact. She leaned against the counter opposite me, crossing her arms. "You're not paralyzed anymore, Ethan," she said softly. "But you're still acting like you're locked in. You're observing the world through a screen, terrified to interact with it because you think it's going to hurt you. It usually does." "Elena hurt you," she corrected. "Marcus hurt you. Julianne just wanted to buy you a steak." She reached out and tapped my cane. "You use this to walk. It helps you move forward. But your cynicism, it's not a cane, Ethan. It's an anchor. If you don't cut the chain, you're going to drown right here in this penthouse." I looked at her. Sarah, the stranger who had saved my life because she bothered to look into my eyes when everyone else looked away. "I don't know how to trust," I admitted. The confession felt heavier than the cane. "I feel like the structural integrity is gone. If I put weight on a relationship, it will collapse." "Then you reinforce it," Sarah said. "You build it slower this time. You test the load, but you don't condemn the building." She picked up the knife again. "Call her back. Tell her the meeting got canceled. Tell her you want to talk about the glass." I stood there for a long time. The silence of the penthouse was different now. It wasn't the menacing silence of the conspiracy. It was just quiet, a blank slate. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I scrolled to Julianne's number. My thumb hovered over the call button. The fear was there, a cold knot in my stomach. What if she was another Elena? What if I was just a Mark? But then I remembered the feeling of the wind on the construction site. I remembered the feeling of standing up at the gala. I remembered that I had survived the worst thing imaginable. If I could survive the darkness, I could probably survive a dinner. I didn't call. Not yet. I wasn't ready to jump. But I sent a text. Meeting finished early. Rain check on the glass discussion. Coffee tomorrow. It was a small step. A limp, really. But it was movement. I put the phone down and walked to the window. The reflection staring back at me was older. There were gray streaks in my temples that hadn't been there a year ago. The lines around my mouth were deeper. I looked like a man who had been to war, but I was standing. I looked out at the city. The lights of New York were millions of stories overlapping. Millions of betrayals and redemptions happening simultaneously. Somewhere out there, Elena was sitting in a cell staring at a concrete wall. Somewhere, Marcus was realizing that his charm didn't work on prison guards. And here, I was breathing. I took a sip of the water. It tasted clean. "Sarah," I said, turning back to the kitchen. "Yeah?" "Put extra garlic in the lasagna." Sarah smiled. "You got it, boss." I walked back toward the living room, the cane tapping a steady rhythm on the floor. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't SOS anymore. It was just the sound of moving forward. I wasn't the man I used to be. That man, the trusting, naive, work-obsessed husband, was dead. He died in that hospital bed. The man who walked out was different. I was harder. I was colder. I was built of reinforced steel and scar tissue. But as I looked at the blueprints of the new building spread out on the coffee table, I realized something. Ruins are not the end. Ruins are the foundation for something new. I sat down, picked up a red pen, and began to correct the design.